Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome, everyone, to Aggressive Negotiations, the first one of 2017. That's right, we're back. The Jedi Masters are back in black. Oh, wait, we don't wear black. We wear brown and tan. Don't we, John?
No, I'm good with black. Luke is my style guide on this one.
Well, I mean, it's a good choice. I mean, I always liked that outfit a lot, so I'm with you. I could do black, too.
Yeah, it's pretty solid.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, when you have a really nice function that you're going to go to, you kind of want to look nice. And what's better than black? It's very slimming as well. So.
Yeah, and I need that help.
Yeah, me too. Well, John, a big thing happened over the holidays, John, for Star Wars fans. Do you remember? I mean, it was kind of, I don't know, it seemed to come and go pretty quickly.
Oh, Rogue One, you mean?
Oh, yeah. Did you end up seeing it?
Out.
Yeah.
I think a couple people saw it.
Yeah. We haven't even got a chance to talk about it yet, John, together, besides the 602 Club episode that we did. But we thought, you know, why don't we do something completely different for our first conversation on Aggressive Negotiations about Rogue One? And we thought, well, let's invite our good friend Nic Anastassiou, who works over there at ILM, to come and talk with us. And I'm proud to welcome our very first guest to Aggressive Negotiations. Nic, how are you doing?
Hey, guys. I am very proud to be with you. I'm doing great. Just coming back from a trip to Europe. Spent the holidays there and actually went to see Rogue One with my son Alex for I think it was my third viewing while I was in London. So, yeah, doing great. Had a great time with the family and just happy to be there. And may I say that I congratulate John on his choice of Jedi outfit. The Luke Skywalker black outfit was always my personal favorite.
Excellent. Great minds.
And if I may already nerd out on that, what I always loved about it is that, of course, in my what was it? I was 12 years old at the time. There was a little bit of Star Wars, Star Trek crossover because it has that little flap, on his black shirt that comes back. And the moment I saw that, I was like, this is just like Admiral Kirk.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Love that thing.
Oh, man. Okay, so Nic, before we dive into Rogue One, if people had never heard our conversation that you and John and I had on the 602 Club, I think the episode's called Three Boys Playing with Toys. We talked to you about the Clone Wars. Tell everybody about your special history real quick with Star Wars and its creator.
Well, I could sum it up by saying I'm a lucky kid. I'm a huge fan of Star Wars, and I got to be George's editor for 7 years. I was George and Dave's editor on the Clone Wars. I fell in love with Star Wars as a 10-year-old boy, like many kids of our generations now, I should say, and eventually one thing led to another, and I ended up working at ILM and became an editor. Was an editor on the prequels, and then in 2006 left ILM temporarily and went to Skywalker Ranch, and was hired by Dave and Jason Tucker, who was at the time the only editor who started the show with Dave. And they brought me on, and I mean, I will be thankful forever to these guys for giving me the chance they gave me. I'd already been a professional in the industry for close to 10 years at that point, 9 years and change. And it was like going to school again, and I learned editing, learned storytelling from them, and I learned Star Wars from George. We all did, and then from Dave, and got to kind of live the dream, which was to enjoy as a fan and as one of the makers of Star Wars at the same time. Be able to kind of do what we all do, which is to say, what would I like to what would I like this character to say? What would I like them to do? And then actually think out your fantasy and help it come to life. So that was, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, which I'll always treasure.
Excellent. Yeah. And given your extensive and special history, and employment history with the franchise, your special connection with it, of course, you're going to have a separate sort of reaction to Rogue One as opposed to those of us fans who are on the outside looking in. And so I think that what were your expectations for Rogue One going into it, if you had any, and what were your initial thoughts about it?
So good question, great question. I was trying to keep my expectations. I don't want to say low because that sort of attaches a notion, low meaning that meaning that you have low expectations sort of means that you're expecting something negative or bad. And by that I mean I was trying more to say I was trying to keep my expectations absent. I figured, okay, if I'm not going to work on a Star Wars project, as much as possible, I would like to approach it first as a fan. And then I guess you could say there was an experiment layer to that also. I kept thinking of George in the back of my mind and everything I know about him, everything I know about his love for Star Wars, for storytelling in general. And I wanted as much as possible to sit down and see it. And I mean this in the most humble possible way, with my George cap on, as if George, knowing and understanding Star Wars, sat down and you showed him a Star Wars story, the way that we would on the Clone Wars, bring him in once or twice a month, and before we went into edit, we would show him the episodes that we had prepared, that we had cut, and then get his reaction. Because it's a unique standpoint to have the man who actually understands, who creates these stories, and then you show him one that's already made. And what happens is he is going to receive it both as a viewer and automatically as he sees it, as if he's already breaking it down in terms of he understands how you put it together. And this is he reverse engineers it as he watches it. You can actually see his eyes moving across the frame. It's really, really cool. So again, and with the most humble way, I wanted to try to approach the movie that same way for myself and just see, okay, if I don't know or know as little as possible about it, sit down and watch it with my George cap on. How am I going to perceive it? My friend Greg, who actually Matthew met last year, was the editor for Rogue One. He was the VFX editor. He
gets
the VFX
all the
editor.
good jobs.
Yep. He's the only guy in our department who's been there longer than me. The only editor. He's been there he's going on his 26th or 27th year. So
Wow.
he deserves it. He is phenomenal. He's a great guy, first of all, and he is a fantastic editor. I couldn't be happier that this guy got to work on those two movies, because again, he's someone who is as professional as he's excited as a fan, and it's very important. I've always tried to let people know, when I was on the Clone Wars, it was the same thing, that it's not BS. Most of the people who help make those movies love them and love the franchise just as much as the fans who are on the outside watching the movie. So I actually had quite a few. It was really funny. He and I had a few conversations because he'd be excited about this sequence that he had done this on, or this cut that he had helped, or this music music cue that he had helped move around or something. And I remember a few times he would come into my office and say, hey, can you come down to my suite? I want to show you this. I did it. This thing works really well now with this music cue. And I'd be like, no, Greg, I don't want to see anything, because on The Force Awakens, I got to work on it for a little bit, just enough to feel like I had a little bit of ownership in the work. Greg was the lead guy, and he did 95%, but just enough that I felt like, okay, I have a little bit of a stake. And so I had no problem watching everything that, that we had, and getting involved with the material. But this, since I wasn't going to touch it at all, I said, I don't want to see anything. And he'd get really frustrated, be like, "Oh, but I really want to show you." And I'd be like, "No, no, I'm sorry, just I don't want to see it." And all the way to his, he cut a finals reel. It's a tradition we do at ILM. At the end of every show, we put together the editors. It's kind of like the editors' prerogative. We work with our supervisors, but we kind of like create our own little sort of academy reel, our best stuff. We choose the music and we cut it. It's basically something that's going to be shown at the show celebration when we're done. And sometimes the supervisors actually use them also when they go around and do a little bit of press or whatnot. And so he was really happy. He struggled for a while with his finals reel for Rogue One, and he was really happy in the end with the way it came together, his music choices. And he was like, "Okay, can you come take a look at it? Like I showed you my finals reel for TFA last year." And I was like, I told you I don't want to watch shots or clips, so I'm not going to watch your finals reel. That's like showing me the best of the entire movie. I'm not going to do that.
You know, just real quick, if I can interject, I want to say that your sense of discipline and self-restraint is amazing to me right now, because you were offered the opportunity to see these things and you said no. So hats off to you, sir, for having the strength of will to do that.
It was not easy. Thank you. It was not easy, because especially when I would, I'd walk over to his office to pick him up so that we'd go to lunch or whatever, and I'd see, he'd have his Avid up, and the screen would be on one shot, and of course, my impulse is to go, "Ooh, what's that? What's going on here? What's this planet? Who's this character?" And I'm like, "Nope, look away," and just say, "Hey, let's go to lunch. Come on, let's go." Yeah, so that was it wasn't always easy, but at the same time, it's also not too difficult, because there's that impulse. But then I don't know, you remind yourself. That's what I was telling you earlier. I was like, okay, I know that if I save myself, if I can resist that quick impulse to want to know, to want to see, I will have that moment of being able to kind of take it all in at once. And I really wanted to do that experiment of like the George Capon and say, okay, if I really sit down and watch it and receive it, and without even really trying to, because I have to say, just from the sheer fact of learning from the old man, from the maker himself for 7 years, that's one thing I will be even more grateful than anything else for him is, and it's a testament to how good of a teacher George was to all of us. Dave starting, of course, but then it trickled all the way down. It's become second nature, and that's something that, as a professional, I'm so thankful for. When I go watch any movie now, I have these things that have become second nature, and I look at it, and it's really cool that he has such a clear way of understanding the language, that he's not only able to see it for himself, but at this particular juncture in his life, he's able to pass that on in a way that's clear enough that, with the proper training and repetition, of course, you can then get it as well. And that's, it's George. We all talked about it on the crew. One thing we benefited from it for those 7 years is he's definitely at a stage where you can tell that he is really keen on passing as much of his passion and knowledge and experience on any chance he gets to the people who are willing, who are responsive, basically. And so we all, I think everyone had tremendous respect for him, just based on that, if nothing else. The fact that he was willing to share, and all in our own disciplines. It wasn't just us, for sure, the editors, because we worked with a director who loves the post-production and editing process and understands it so well. But even the episodic directors, the layout artists, who were basically part cameraman, part animators. The layout artists on the Clone Wars were teams that basically worked all, of course, with 3D characters, because the show was all animated. But they were each episodic director had a team of 4 layout artists. And so the episodic director, once they got kind of their marching orders from George and Dave about the story breakdown, the reels, and the types of stylistic direction that George and Dave were looking for, it was their job for about a month or so to go and get their layout artists to shoot the episode for them. So these guys had to learn camera and editing as well, and and they basically were soaking up a lot of George's aesthetic and his words in terms of framing and the importance of framing, composition, and all that stuff. Again, it's like you do it over and over and over and over, and he's there. And once George understands that you are genuinely out to learn and that your desire is honest, he has the patience, definitely, that not a lot of filmmakers have to kind of go over it with you as many times as needed. It helps that he also has the money that is required to basically say, and he told us that many times. If we break it one time, 2 times, doesn't matter. We'll do it over again. We'll probably suck, but then eventually we'll get good. Sure enough, do it enough times, and we got pretty good by the end. So.
Well, that's something that's really interesting, Nick, and it is a question that I had thought of for you. You've worked with Dave and, of course, with George himself. And watching Rogue One, what did Gareth Edwards bring to the table, do you think? Did he stretch Star Wars in the same way that they did? Was it different? How do you feel like the film Rogue One and what Gareth Edwards did added to Star Wars, or also was a homage? What did you think of the job that he did in the film, making Star Wars and making it feel different, new, all those things that we all think of when we watch a new Star Wars film?
I think all of the above. Really, I really believe that what I felt. It's first of all, let me back up and say it's hard. I will tell you that I have what I consider to be, as much as possible, my own personal feelings, and then the ones, if I sort of go back to what I was saying and put my George cap on, or if I look at it through the lens of Dave, or compare Gareth's work in the film to what Dave did, or the way he worked on Star Wars, his approach. But in the end, of course, there is a degree of cross-pollination between all those, and you can't completely disconnect. I know that even when I try to process and look at the film, if I say, okay, this is, what does Nick think of it? Some of it is going to be influenced by other things, by some of these other things I mentioned, and so on and so forth. So, I really think from the get-go, everything I would hear at work from people who were directly involved with the making of the film. I know John Knoll fairly well. I mean, he was one of my first supervisors. John was my soup. I was the editor on Pirates of the Caribbean, which John was the supervisor for, and he together for a couple of years on a NASA project that I was trying to put together. I became friends with some guys from JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. They had come to ILM do a talk, and I ended up staying in touch with them. And from there, kind of got the idea that it would be cool if ILM did something, that piece of work where we could use the creative know-how that we had, but put it to use to something that was quote unquote real, that had an application in the world outside just of entertainment. And when pitched my idea to John, well, first of all, is a genius, and secondly is a big fan of NASA and the space race history. And we kind of came up with this concept. The guys that I knew were all involved with the Mars rovers project. One was a former astronaut, but at that point they were both involved with the Mars rovers project. And we pitched them our idea, and then all four of us pitched that to ILM upper management at the time. This was in the early 2000s, like I want to say around 2003, 2004. And anyway, we ended up working on that for a couple of years. So, John and I had lunch with him a few times early last year, and he was telling me a few things about the project and so on. And then I would talk to Greg, and again, I would always try to stay on the periphery of, like, it wasn't about like, oh, what's the story about, or what happens, or what's the twist, or what's the end. It was more about just casual conversation, and then just more. They would talk about their part, where they were at, like how they had come to the process and what was going on. And working with Gareth, I had lunch with Dave. I think it was last spring, and that what Dave said will sum up kind of what I was picking up, the chatter that I was picking up overall from everyone. Dave told me, and I don't think he would mind, me sharing that, because there's nothing. He said, the thing I loved about Gareth is that I really felt a passion and respect and care from him. All the directors have had chats with Dave, because he's one of the few left who actually got to work on Star Wars and got to learn directly from George, etc. And he said, Gareth really, you could tell that he was someone who had a vision, had his own story to tell, his own aesthetic, but at the same time, he is someone who had a lot of respect, and he really wanted to learn how Star Wars is done, how Star Wars is told. He understood that it was important to not just repeat, but he also really wanted to learn what are the precepts. And I think this is, and that I really felt a sense of kinship in the outcome. If you compare something like the Clone Wars to something like Rogue One, you can tell that there is a sense of aesthetic and a vision and storytelling and tone that is proper to the filmmaker, but it feels like it's someone who is also aware, knowledgeable, who has taken the time to actually do their homework, to learn it's not a formula, it's really a language. What is the language? There's a language of film, and then there's the language of Star Wars. And Star Wars does have a language. And so there are homages, there are callbacks, but it's never fan service. It's never gimmicky, because it's not like a cheap, hey, check out this thing that you're going to recognize. See, elbow, winch, knock, knock. It's more of an understanding. It's something that you recognize because you know the language of Star Wars, and this person did it, and so it's there. That knowledge filtered, and so it's there, but it's motivated. And even if it's simple, like Ponda Baba walking by and saying, "Hey, watch yourself." Yes, it is. It's a gag, but you get the sense that there's that sense of respect, and so it's very simple, very quick, funny, but it's also at the right time. It's not longer than it should be, not shorter, and it plays well into the story. And whether it's something small like this or Saw's presence, it's all connective tissue that is really crafted, and that's, I think, the best word to use. You sense the craft in the making of the film. This is a film that's thought through, and there's equal parts passion and craft in the making of the film, in my opinion.
Given that, and I agree with you. I think that there is very much, you get the sense of an artist at work. But given that, and given the the callbacks that are in there, were there any surprises in the choices, whether it's with the editing or anything of the sort that appeared in it? And of those surprises, was there anything that jumped out at you where it just what felt really authentic, and what was there anything that struck in even a slightly inauthentic chord while you were watching it?
Yeah, there were a few. I mean, it's a film, and this I'm going to step completely into just as a fan first, and as a film professional. I don't think it's a perfect film by any stretch. I think the good and even the great, I think it's pretty clear at this point. I haven't said it yet, but that I really enjoyed the film. But the good and the great really outweighs, the less than great, or the imperfections. But it's
Sure.
not perfect. And starting with maybe it's inauthentic, or the faults, the things that are kind of that could be better. And honestly, I'm not trying to be an apologist for the film or Gareth. I think all of these things I will be the first to say, and I don't say that often, that I feel like they are really 20/20 hindsight. Like I've been involved in the making of films, good or bad. There's an equal number that turned out horrible, as the ones that turned out great. But I can tell you that when you're in the heat of the moment and the pressure is on, even something like our little cartoon that could, you do your best, and literally, it's really funny. I don't know what happens. I don't know exactly what the mechanism is. As soon as somebody says put the pencil down, it can literally be that short thereafter, like 30 seconds later, when you know you can't do anything more, that it's done basically. You look at it again, you're like, oh shoot, I should have moved this shot here. This should be shorter. That line would have been so much better if we had done this. Yeah, I mean, it's really weird. The moment that pressure is gone because it's out of your control, you start to see the things that you could still do or should have done better or shouldn't have done. So there are a few of those things. To me, they really jump out as things that are really, I would say, not out of their control, but that you would only see after the fact. But for example, I do think that in the editing, in the first half of the movie, the first, let's say, 50 minutes, it's a little too long at times. Some of the exposition is a little too on the nose. There are moments when a good example, the best example in my opinion, is Galen's message to Jin. I think it's a very important character moment. It's pivotal because it's the point of the story where obviously there's an emotional connection, and you really want the audience to partake in that, because through that emotional connection between father and daughter is what is going to change Jin's character. She's going to go from cynic to believer, and she's going to become the hero. And I feel, and this is just, I didn't work on the movie, so I don't know. This is really just my reaction as a viewer, that maybe there's a little bit of doubt going on at that point, and they're trying too hard to explain what has happened, where we're at, where we need to go. They go even as far as telling us what needs to happen in the next movie, which we really don't need to know for this movie. They tell us, the flaw is this, and you need to shoot the torpedoes down this exhaust port, and this will happen, and the reactor will overload, which we really don't need for this movie, because tune into New Hope, kids, and they'll tell you everything you need to know for that one.
Right.
And in doing that, you lose a little bit of the emotional connection. What personally, I would have basically trimmed by half that speech, and try to focus as much as possible on Galen really talking to Jin, as a daughter, and having the rest of the dialogue be as much as possible. And my legacy is that I built a flaw within the Death Star, and no one will know that I did it, but it doesn't matter, because I did this for you. I did this for the galaxy. Go find the plans and bring them to the rebellion, and that's it. Then there's a few things. I feel like I loved Tarkin, and I loved the movie ending with Leia, even more so now. Sadly, I wish that I didn't love it more so for that now. But now that Carrie Fisher has left us, it's an even more striking way for the film to end. But I do feel like with Tarkin, especially because Leia's scene is so brief, there are a few times when, and I don't know if the right term here is inauthentic, but Tarkin's presence in some of the scenes is completely, it needs to be Tarkin. He needs to be shot the way he is, and he needs to say what he needs to say. And then there are a few times where it feels like we're almost on the verge of becoming a little gimmicky, where it's almost like, look at what we can do, and we hold on the shot a little too long, or it's Tarkin saying something that it could just as well be another character saying the line. So I felt like that also was kind of one of the few things where I would have, if I had been, my instinct would be to dial back a little bit on that. And I think the last thing is probably the music, and that again I will sort of, and it's not me being an apologist. I genuinely think that, first of all, there's something which, no matter how awesome the score would be, you're seeing a first Star Wars major motion picture without John Williams. and your brain is going to scream for 2 hours, this is wrong, 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 this is wrong. And ultimately, whoever the first unlucky guy it is going to be who has that task of being the first at bat, providing a score for the first major Star Wars motion picture, who's not John Williams, is going to be up against that. If it's going to be anybody, it might as well be Michael Giacchino, because he is probably the best, if definitely one of the best, and arguably the best there is right now in that league. And again, it sounds like I'm making excuses, but like he had such a short amount of time. I mean, I was talking about that with Greg after the film came out, because Greg was obviously very involved with the change over, like when it happened. But Giacchino had less than 2 months to put together a score for a Star Wars picture, and he came in cold. And at the end of production. And so, all things considered, if you consider that it's, you're replacing John Williams for the first time, and you have 6 weeks to come up with a score, it's a great score overall. But there are a few moments, particularly I think there's one cue when we first established the Yavin base, where I felt like that it felt a little clunky, that felt a little inauthentic. That's the right word there, where I felt like, okay, we're trying too hard there to kind of have the a little bit of a fanfare and like introduce the rebellion and call back musically to what it is from New Hope. But you see, I mean, those are really like very, very nitpicky things. I have to like run through the film with a comb. And then as far as authentic, I saved the best, the good for last. I mean, there's so much. I don't even know where to start. I'll give you guys, my favorite. I think the thing that is, in my opinion, where you really see the craft and the knowledge and the understanding of Star Wars that Gareth Edwards showed in the film is Vader. I think the characterization of Vader, the way he's introduced, the way you're led to Vader, both of his scenes are, and that I will say full on, from having sat and having had George teach us how the principal players of Star Wars think, who they are, what their motivations are. George spent a lot of time first telling us everything that's wrong about the perceptions that people have of these characters, and why that often translates in derived products in wrong characterizations of those characters. He taught us, and Vader is definitely at the top of the list. What are all the wrong ways, for the right reasons, that people write or play or show Vader wrong, and by opposition, what is the right kind of Vader? And this was obviously somebody who's listened, who learned, who took the time to understand who Vader is, who Anakin was, and that's very important, and why Vader is the way he is. And based on that, and it's always that's what Dave taught us later on, you have to figure out why things work in a scene visually, in a page in terms of dialogue. And then once you understand the why, how to shoot it and how to get it to look right, it will. You're 90% of the way. If you can break the why, then the rest will flow from that. And you can see that in those two scenes. I mean, this restores, George always said, Vader he's not really the worst, because Palpatine is really the worst person. Palpatine is really Satan. But Vader is the image of the worst thing that you can walk in a room and find in front of you, because Palpatine likes to work from the shadows, and Palpatine doesn't want people to know that he exists. Palpatine doesn't want people to think of him, those who do know he exists, as evil. And so he's very content with having Vader appear to be the worst person, the worst thing that exists, which in a way is also, that shows how horrible of a relationship father-son, Palpatine has to Vader. he basically it builds him up, but he builds him up to make him into this thing that the entire galaxy will hate. And when Vader appears, that's what happens. You're supposed to think, oh shoot, this is the worst thing that could happen to me today. And also, this is obviously, you're at a stage, this is before Luke has come back. And Luke, in their relationship, him and Vader, him and Anakin, you really see also the importance of Luke. If you forget all the galactic scale of things, you see the role, the importance, how essential and how good Luke is, because he is the instrument, he is the tool that is going to be able to break that ice that has formed around Vader's heart, and he is going to bring back Anakin. And ultimately, it's one of the many reasons, one of the many ways you can see how Luke is the chosen one, how Luke brings back Anakin to be the chosen one. And this is Vader before all that. This is Vader at the peak of having been poisoned for 2 decades with anger and hatred and resentment and rage by Palpatine, and all of that is just coming out of him, pouring out of it in sheer power. Now, it's the wrong kind of power, but it's still power, and that's the second scene. And when Vader comes out and his lightsaber comes on at the end of the film, you really, again, George wanted you in New Hope to think this is not a nice person, and good things are not going to happen around him. This is someone who has so much anger in him that he is going to take it out on others. And those I think are my 2 favorite scenes in the film. And it's not just the fact that I'm a big Star Wars fan, and of course Vader is such an icon. It's just that they're so well crafted. The fact that the way that Mustafar is introduced and seeing the castle, and that's a double callback. It's a callback to the prequels. It's a callback to Ralph McQuarrie, and the way that we're led, and we see him vulnerable, and then we see him, built up into the shadow of Vader, and then Vader appears. It's just so well. It's such a George type of being led from idea A to B to C, and then at the end, it's a great way. Again, it just works for Vader himself. It works for the message of the film, because it just shows the effort that it takes for the rebels to get that stinking message back to Leia. It just shows, the whole concept of the resistance, and that's a callback to World War II also, and what it took for the Allies to do what they did, to turn the odds back. So, yeah, I think Vader is probably my favorite, or sort of the most powerful, I think, example of everything the movie does right. But there are many others.
One of the things I think is really interesting, you worked on the Clone Wars, and so I wondered how you felt about, Saul Guerrera's inclusion in the film, and do you feel like there was enough backstory within the context of the film to make him resonate with the audiences who might not be familiar yet with the Clone Wars the way that, big time super Star Wars fans are?
Yeah. Well, to answer the first part of your question, I was ecstatic when I found out that Saul was in the film. I really
me too.
was ecstatic, and yeah, and that was one of the few times that Greg broke through my request for a moratorium on any information. And I remember actually the day that he emailed me and he said, "Oh, there's something I got to tell you." And I said, "I told you before, I don't want you to tell me anything." And he said, "No, please let me tell you this, because I think you will really appreciate that." I said, "Okay, just don't ruin anything, but if I trust you." And he said, "Okay, there's a character from the Clone Wars on the film, in the film." And of course, the moment he said that, I see, John, this is where I couldn't say, "Okay, fine," and I'll leave it at that. I was like, "Okay, well, now you have to tell me, who is it?" And he let that carrot dangle a little bit, but then he was like, it's Saw Gerrera, and I think it's great. And the choice of character itself, I think, helps answer the second part of your question, Matthew. I think it's a character who, even though we don't see him very much in the Clone Wars, is very important. It's a character that goes at the core of a lot of ideas, and I'm really at the core of a lot of ideas that George had about what the rebellion is, what the Empire is, our perceptions of good versus evil. It basically, you could link Saw Gerrera to, you could say that he is another representation of one of my favorite parts of a Star Wars crawl of all seven. It's Episode 3. There are heroes and villains on both sides. That's an idea that's very near and dear to George, and I can inject a little more of that, because I know all the stuff that George was telling us as we were working on the Onderon arc. But I think it's there, even if you didn't have to be in the room. If you watch this arc and you know what Star Wars is about and what the Clone Wars is about, you pick up a lot of it, I think, intuitively. Saw represents, in George's mind, Onderon was the birth of the rebellion, and Saw was the birth of the rebellion. And those ideas that are talked about in that scene, where Mon Mothma tells Jyn about the breakup or the split between Saw and the rest of the Alliance. I mean, again, it shows somebody who did his homework. It shows somebody who wanted to know the history and the nuances, the importance of who's, what, why, how, when, where, because this is all stuff that George came up with and developed with Dave for the Onderon arc. Some of it we used, some of it we left off, and it was more implicit. It was at times meant to be more explicit and was going to be described and even developed on further, but we dialed back. But the idea was exactly that the rebellion was born out of terrorism, basically, and that's who Saw was. George. There's a former CIA analyst who I heard, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, who was talking about the importance to be able to understand your enemy, because even in the context of having to defeat them, if you understand their motivation and who they are, you understand them as human beings, and you're better able to anticipate them. But also, she put that in perspective of saying, the bravest thing you can do for yourself as a human being is to see them as human beings as well, because once you do, you will see that you will have a much harder time seeing them as an enemy and as anything other than another human being, and you will understand maybe why they do what they do. You may still have to stop them, but it's important, because in the end, we all, nobody is the villain of their own story. And that was a message that was always critical for George to push through in Star Wars. And really, again, the idea is that the rebellion is born pretty much on Onderon. It's born from this faction, from this man who basically sees he has to resist, but also sees that no system is really good, that they're both corrupt in their own way, and says, I have to do things my own way. And then he goes too far, and he loses his way. And that's why eventually, once the rebellion has grown, they distance themselves from him and his faction. But all of this was, in my opinion, it felt like a direct continuation of some of the ideas that we had talked about continuing and showing further in the Clone Wars. It felt like it was all there in Rogue One. And what I loved was to conclude on what you were asking me about, Matthew, it felt like catered to all levels of knowledge or fandom. If you know a lot, you can fill in a lot of the blanks and appreciate everything, the subtext that's in the film, in the character, and that really gives it a measure of quality. If you know a little bit, you'll be able to pick up that there's just probably some gap filling knowledge out there, and as a fan who already knows some and you picked up on that, I think then it gives you an appreciation for the fact that the movie is telling you, go check this out or go check that out, and you'll go find it on your own. If you don't, it's again, there's a level of quality there because it's done in a way where it all works in a self-contained way. You're not going to feel left out and say, well, who's this or what are they talking about? I feel like I missed something. So I felt like Saw was very well crafted as a character just for the sake of Rogue One, and as someone who, if you know more, you can feel the weight of everything that's happened ever since Onderon, all the way to Jyn.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, especially when you look at the apparatus that he's in, and if you've seen the Clone Wars episode, you can just feel 19 years of war in this guy's broken body. And I loved the correlation then between him fighting on the good side, but slowly kind of turning into a Vader. Whereas Vader, like you were talking about with the heroes on both sides, but they're kind of slowly morphing into the same thing. It was so well done to me.
Exactly. Yep, absolutely. And then I think that there again, you see the work of someone who really cares for and took the time, as much, no one's perfect, but as much as they could, who took the time to try to really understand and apply their knowledge of everything that is Star Wars, because there is that mirror effect of Saw as another Vader figure. And to a certain extent, he basically goes through the entire Vader arc in the 10 minutes or 12 minutes he has of screen time, of being nearly consumed by his own kind of rage and anger initially, even though you've set him up in this sort of prologue as someone who is obviously good, and you can see very quickly that it's someone who still has good in him, and all the way to his death and the choice he makes to not be turned into Vader, and to the fact that he rips off the breathing apparatus right before he dies, and the choice that he makes to be human basically, and to not be the machine, and all of that is these powerful symbols that work because it's the Vader arc applied to a different character, but it's just as appropriate. And it also works on this level as a mechanism in the language of Star Wars again, where that applies another one of George's rules, the whole symphonic movement of Star Wars. These echoes, circles within circles, these things that you pick up on, and it's not just repetitive because again, it's motivated. So it's appropriate. It's not just reusing something and kind of throwing it in there where it's just like. No, there is that mirror effect, but it has its own motivation.
Yeah, I know that Saw has been definitely a favorite of the fans to have included. And I thought that Whitaker gave a fine performance. But setting aside Saw for a second, because we know that he is a George Lucas character brought into this narrative, of the new characters that came in, which were the most successful for you? Which felt the most at home in essentially George Lucas's sandbox?
That's a good question. I honestly feel like they all worked. Of the brand new characters, I feel like in a weird way, and I don't know if that's conscious or not, if it's just me putting that, but in a weird way, probably K2.
I could see that.
Because, and again, I'm actually, it's funny, I hadn't thought about that at all. So I'm just kind of thinking this through right now as we speak, but I feel like his voice, not his literal voice, but the voice of the character, feels like it's the most Star Wars like, classic, iconic Star Wars like. The combination of cynicism, humor, the banter. It's a little edgier because the movie itself is a little edgier, a little darker than your quote unquote average Star Wars movie.
Yeah, sure.
But it's still very much, very 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 much a Star Wars character, and I think I could all see them, show up in the background or having a part in a Star Wars movie, and they wouldn't feel out of place. But K2 could walk on. I can imagine him injected into pretty much any of the other films, and he wouldn't feel out of place. And again, I just thought of that, and I have no idea whether this is something that they thought or if it's just happy coincidence. And it's again those kind of like symphonic echoes working themselves into Star Wars history here. But again, you have kind of this droid character who he doesn't lead you into the story the way that R2D2 and 3PO do, but kind of does, because if you think about it, he is the one who grabs literally Jyn and sets her in motion into her journey. And as you reach the climax of the film, he's also, which that I think is the most important, where I would kind of use the parallel of the droid sort of setting the tone. He's the first one who sacrifices himself. So he is the first one who's going to kind of carry that message, literally and figuratively, to the rest of the films. And he's the first one to set off the chain of events that's kind of the pattern, the model for the last 20 minutes of the film, which is everyone is going to have to pay the ultimate price to get that message, the plans, over to the rest of the alliance. I did that part. I did remark on when I saw the film again with Alex. I didn't add two and two together and sort of expand on that, but I do remember in our post-film conversation talking about the fact that K2 is the first one who dies, and that because we were basically, I think he asked me which one was your favorite death, but like of the sacrifices, which one you thought was the most powerful. And I said, well, I think it's K2's actually. I thought about it for a minute, and I said, I think K2's is kind of the one that I see as the most poignant, the most emotional, the one that really kind of moved me the most. In that sense, I see again, kind of fortuitously or not, this thing working itself out of, in a way, that's another typical George message. It's the character who you could dismiss as the most insignificant, the most minor, because in this case it's the comic relief of the film, who ends up being the one. It's a very Tolkien-esque idea, don't discount the little people, because the biggest change can come from the smallest creature.
Right. Sure. Yeah. No. I hadn't even thought about that till you said it. That he becomes the symbol of the sacrifice they're all going to have to make, and like you saying that, it really is a beautiful sort of symmetry as well. Because I remember reading an interview with George Lucas at one point where he said that if you trace the evolution of the droids with the evolution of Vader in the prequels, they become more human as he becomes more mechanical. It's really kind of really cool that you're pointing out that there's yet another mechanical life that has more humanity in himself at that point than Vader does, and I think that's really neat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and picking up on what you just said and expanding on that, I think you see that even for K2 in his arc in the film, not so much that he's mechanical throughout, but you can see him kind of operating in a more binary way at first, or having kind of as a character having a more black and white perception of things. And by the end, his own character arc, he definitely has a lot more nuance in his perception and judgment of things and people. The way that he treats Jyn, even though it's for comic relief, but he's very much sort of like there's this and there's that at first, and by the end, obviously, and that leads to his sacrifice. He has himself already grown a lot, and so yeah, I think that also plays into what you were just saying.
So this is something that's been really interesting. I've gotten to hear a couple of different interviews with Gareth Edwards. The latest one was on the Director's Cut podcast, where directors interview other directors about their work, and Chris Miller was interviewing Han Solo director, interviewing Rogue One director Gareth Edwards, and he was talking about that when they were first talking about the effect shots for Rogue One, that they thought there would be about 600 effect shots, and by the time they were done, there were 1,600. So I wanted, just because you are an ILM editor and you know exactly what that's like to have to try and put all this together, what challenges does that pose to the editing team? Because I also know Gareth, in a lot of ways, seemed to work very much like George, where he just shot tons of stuff, and then they put it together in the editing room. So talk about, just from a technical standpoint, and somebody knows what that's like, putting all that together.
Well, for the editing team on the cutting room side of things, or the studio side of things, I don't want to say that it's it's easier, but strictly from the effects standpoint, you could say that it is, in the sense that the way that the cutting rooms work when they're assembling the movie together, they don't think initially in terms of effects breakdown. Is this an effect shot or not? What type of effect shot? Is it complicated or not? They work in this in a very quick manner. Their job is to make the story work and to do whatever is needed to make it work. And fortunately for them, at this point in our industry, there are many tools which allow them to do that in a fairly, everything is relative, but fairly simple, quick, and cheap way, and still very effective. A lot of cutting rooms will have either, sometimes it's actually the effects editor on the studio side himself or herself, or they'll have a small team, or sometimes the studios will have like a small effects department which will provide them a couple of guys that do a lot of After Effects, Photoshop, that have kind of these off-the-shelf platforms, and they can create very convincing sort of what we call reference effects work. Whether it's just, sometimes it can be just like doing like splits. If there's a performance from one character who was better in one take and from another character in another take. Sometimes it's just it's adding things in the background that are not yet in the shot, or correcting mistakes. And those are the ones that come to bite us in the end. So there's a lot of stuff which you realize after the fact, once you're cutting your film. Oh, this is a great scene. This works perfectly, except crap, we realized that half the takes the belt was off, and so we have this scene assembled and it works great, except that we keep cutting to this character with the belt on, belt off, belt on, belt off. Part of it is the inevitable reality of filmmaking. Part of it is, I think, filmmakers in general have become a little lazier because they know that so much can be done in post. And to be fair to them also, to balance things out, pressures have increased, schedules have decreased. They have to shoot a lot more in a lot less time. And so that, coupled with the fact that we know we can, quote unquote, fix it in post, you have a lot of stuff like that. And also the notion that it's something, where you think to yourself, oh, it's not like I'm asking to add a whole CG character or to remove someone that was human and replace them with a Jabba the Hutt. No, it's like, come on, guys, the belt was on and then it was off. It's just, just add a little belt. Well, the thing is, the notion that it's just a belt is not necessarily, just because it's not something as glamorous as putting a new character or changing this ship. Visually, yes, it may not be as big of a concept. That doesn't mean that the work is any simpler. If you tell the effects team, oh, by the way, of the 50 shots in this scene, 30 that were non-effects shots are now effects shots because we realized that we're missing the belt and we have to put a CG belt. That work, as simple as it is as an idea visually, can be as complicated, if not more. The reason why it can be more, and oftentimes is because this is something a lot of times well, not all the time now, we always have our visual effects supervisors with a whole production crew from ILM on site while the film is shot, and anything that we know we're going to be involved with, lightly or heavily, we do all kinds of stuff so that we have our ducks lined in a row and we know what we need to do, and we provide ourselves with all kinds of data and information for reference, lighting, and so on, or we actually will, our supervisors will work with the directors on set to shoot things a certain way with this type of lighting and these types of angles to facilitate what's going to need to be done later. Well, when you come to an effects company and you say, by the way, these 30 shots, we need to add the belt. Well, it's not as simple because, first of all, again, the work in itself can be complicated, but it is further complicated by the fact that a lot of times, due to the nature of what was realized after the fact, you're talking about material that was not shot under those very kind of regulated, planned circumstances. And so then all kinds of red flags are there, which to the eyes of even experienced filmmakers are completely invisible because it's not their job to know or to care about that. But there's all kinds of problems with lighting, with obstructions, movement that all of a sudden make the job 10 times harder. At the same time, you cannot go back to your director, to your studio and say, well, adding a belt is really hard. So as the effects editor, so the cutting room side team, they can do these fixes very quickly, fairly easily, relatively speaking, and in a vacuum that works great for everyone in what we call the offline world. Meaning, this is you're at the Avid, that's the editing software that we use, and the director comes in and we'll sit down with the editor. Sometimes the producer will come in as well, and they'll watch it and they'll be like, "Oh, cool, it's awesome. Yeah, the belt that you put in looks great." Well, that's because it's a cheat, right? And it's basically in this low res version of the cut that you're watching on a 15-inch monitor. And that's actually part of the further problem is visually it works great. And so automatically in the mind of everyone, and even at this high level, I saw it happen even with George. It's normal. It's an intuitive, it's an instinctive reaction. The moment you see it work with something that you could do in half hour or in a day, you tell yourself, well, come on, how complicated could it be for 500 guys with unlimited processing power to do it? Well, the difference is that this is something that was done in half an hour or in a day, again, to work on at a very low res on a 15-inch monitor. It's not something that's done to work and to hold up and to look like it belongs in the frame on a 50-foot screen or an IMAX screen in perpetuity. So it's two completely different ball games. And the work of the effects editor, well, one of the parts of our work, is sometimes it actually incumbs on us to identify that. And let's say, and again, I take this imaginary thing of the belt problem. Sometimes it comes from the client, from the studio. They'll see that and they'll come and say, oh, by the way, we're missing this. Sometimes you get the sequence turned over. We call that the turnover. You'll receive it, and you first go through it, and you realize that the belt's missing in 30 shots, and you go, ooh. So the first thing you do is you contact someone in the cutting room, and you have usually a counterpart, and you start a dialogue with them. You don't want to ring any alarm before you've basically kind of lined up your ducks on both sides, and you kind of go, okay, I've noticed this. Is this something that we care about or we don't care about? If we don't care about it, mum's the word. I'm not going to say anything. You don't say anything, and we move on. If they say, oops, then usually they'll go talk about it with their producer. And if the word comes back that, oh, yep, that's a problem, then we'll do the same thing. We'll go to our producer and say, okay, so I noticed this. I talked about it with these guys. and it's a problem they hadn't noticed, or they're aware, but it is a problem. And all of a sudden, then there'll be a meeting where now we bring in the supervisor, and then usually we have like regular conversations at first. It can be once a week, and then eventually further on in the production it becomes daily, where we get together with the director and the VFX producer on the studio side, and their whole team, and basically we'll talk about it, and we talk about possible workarounds and so on and so forth. What do we need to do? What can we get away with? Is there any way you can use alt takes? Can you reduce the number of shots where we see the belt? Can we reframe on some shots to be above the waist so we don't have to see the belt, et cetera, et cetera? So we try to we'll do mock-ups sometimes. We'll work with our supervisor and say, okay, what can we cheat here? Be creative. And then once you've exhausted that, you say, okay, these are of the 30, these are the 20 shots of the 19 shots where we couldn't do anything. So those, now we're going to have to, roto or do whatever we can to basically create and put a CG belt on and track it to the character, et cetera, et cetera. So in the case of, I don't have specific examples because I didn't work on the show, but in the case of Rogue One, I would imagine there's probably a whole spectrum of things. But I would imagine that there was probably a lot of that. Having worked on other Star Wars live action films, on the prequels, there is a ton of that. And that usually ends up, pretty much doubling, if not more, your effects work. A lot of stuff which you don't think of at first as an effects shot, but later becomes, because of effects and because of a million little things like that, which are actually really not little at all. But I remember having lunch with John Knoll last year. I think it was sometime in the spring. And at the time already, it ended up, like you said, being close to 1,600 shots. But at the time, he was laughing. He said, they're asking me, and he was there. It's his baby. He wrote, the story, and he was there the whole time they shot it. But at that point, he has stepped back into his role as visual effects supervisor, and he was telling me they're telling me that I have a budget for 700 shots, and I've done my own breakdown looking at the current cut, and I've told them that I can already tell them that it's going to be at least 1,000 to 1,100. So, and it's pretty, it's pretty standard. It's normal, like on it's been like that for a long time. That's nothing new either. On every show I've been on, pretty much, I worked on a few Marvel shows last couple of years, and when I was on Ant-Man, the initial bid was, I think, for 275 shots. We did, I think, close to 500 on Captain America. The initial bid was for, I think, about 500. We ended up doing close to 900. So it usually, at the very least, I just finished working on Skull Island, and again, our initial bid was for 770 shots. I want to say something around it was in the 700 ballpark. We ended up doing about 1,400 shots. Now, not all of those are in the movie either. You also have, this is where you see how statistics can be very deceiving. You have the final number of shots, and you'll be told the number of final shots, maybe, again, 1,400, 1,500. That doesn't mean that all those are in the film, because that includes any and all shots that were completed but then removed for one reason or another. And there can be on some shows almost an equal number of shots removed as there are completed in the picture, for, again, any number of reasons, recuts, or but just change in concept for a sequence, and all of a sudden you have a 200 shot sequence that's just gone from the film completely. And if it happens to be one of the first ones we did, the whole sequence is completed effects wise, but it's still removed. And invariably, it's so funny. You'll get artists, when you're the effects editor, and you prepare reels and cuts and crews, animators, compositors, technical directors will work in a very, very kind of tunnel vision environment. They work really at the pixel level, and they rarely, they even at times forget to see their shot as a shot. They're looking at it on the frame, in kind of a frame universe, stills basically, and certainly not in the context of a sequence or the whole movie. And then, a month or two later, they moved on to another show sometimes or another sequence, and you'll get a call from somebody who sometimes you can really, I feel bad because you can feel sometimes they're angry, sometimes they're just genuinely upset, and they say, "Where, I don't understand. Where is OP 300?" And you're like, "What do you mean?" "Well, it's not in the sequence anymore, and it's a 500 shot. It's a 500 frame shot, and I worked on it for 3 weeks. It was a huge, complicated shot." And you have to tell them, "Well, yeah, but it, and you try to explain to them the fact that not in a bad way, but the director doesn't service the fact that it's a shot that you worked on painstakingly for 3 weeks, and it's a beautiful shot. It just, had no more place in the film, in the story, and so it got taken out. Because once it's completed, and George would always tell us that, never, ever, ever fall in love with the shot for what it is. You have to look at your sequence, and everything has to serve the story. And if it doesn't serve the story, no matter how awesome the line of dialogue, no matter how awesome the performance, no matter how awesome the effect, it does not matter. If it doesn't serve the story, cut it out. And we cut out entire scenes on the Clone Wars. And that was even more heartbreaking because those are all put together from nothing. And you just have to get rid of it completely to serve the episode as a whole.
Yeah, well, I mean that's especially these are really, I think, very valuable insights to have, because you get those those sound bites about the number of effects shots ballooning and not having the context of how things work. Sometimes that quote, somebody can say something where they're forgetting that they have to give all of that context for something, or that people might. A lot of people have cued on the fact that in the first Rogue One trailer, there are a lot of shots that did not appear in the final film. And I think that speaks to what you were just saying, where, the shot is beautiful, but it didn't service the story, so it had to go. And it might have looked wonderful and you might have loved it, but you got to just walk away.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I couldn't tell you the specifics for Rogue One because I wasn't on the show, but I do know that they were working under the principle of, without being wasteful, they wanted to service the story, they wanted to service the film, and I know that everyone around the production structure wanted to be able to give Gareth the best possible means to complete this film, to make it as good as it could be. That's simple as that. And I know that there was a lot of material, that was reshot, and it wasn't just additions; they replaced a lot of material. So again, I couldn't tell you how far along the sections that they replaced were at the time they were, but I'm pretty confident, based on the timelines, that a good deal of it was already underway, some of it had probably already been finalized a first time. I mean, and again, this is not something that's specific or unique to Rogue One. It's very common for these types of films today. It happens routinely, whatever the film, whoever the director, whatever the effects house. It has nothing to do with the specifics and the individuals. It's kind of part of the process. I know it happened on The Force Awakens as well. There was a lot of materials replaced, and again, it's not just additions. It's literally things which say, well, that was one thing, but we have to redo it to make it better, or we have to take out this version, as much as we wouldn't want to, because if we fall in love with it, then we're falling in love with one thing, but that one thing is actually holding back the whole. So we have to be willing to sacrifice the one thing and service the whole. And certainly on the last few shows that I was on, it's the same thing. There was a lot of it's a pretty common practice. I think now, again, the tools at hand, having made the process easier in terms of, you don't have to deal with film, which is extremely costly. to shoot, to process, which is extremely fragile. And so the more film you have to juggle, the more chances you have that you're going to screw something up and you can't replace it. With just the photography process being as simplified as it's become and as democratized, kind of, it definitely makes it easier to pull the trigger on saying, you know what, let's not settle. Let's just go back and get it right. Whereas before, you kind of really, you had to plan more ahead, which can be good sometimes, but you really had to, if you saw something, if you caught your stormtrooper bonking his head on the top of the doorway, you kind of have to be like, well, do I want to spend the $15,000 to just reshoot the one shot so that the stormtrooper doesn't hit his head on the doorway, or do I want to just let it go and spend the $15,000 on something else that I know I absolutely need? So, and we, on all these films, even on the front end, you see it. It's a joke that everyone makes. The shooting ratio is always huge now. I mean, you get all this footage back, and a lot of amazing photography, some hero photography, background stuff, and that the ratio of what is used versus what was shot is always going to be extremely small now, because they can shoot so much, they can just roll and 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 roll. That's definitely a big job for the cutting rooms. Initially, it's just going through all this stuff, and eventually that also is what ends up dictating or driving kind of abandoning the ratio of what's used. Is you actually run out of time to go through all of it. There's so much that it becomes kind of its own enemy, because you start to go through and you're like, oh man, I have like upteen takes of this, and then you realize 6 hours or 2 days into it, you're like, oh my god, I haven't even gone through 20% of it. So we have to stop and make a select in the 20% that we've already watched, because we don't have the time to just, if we do this for every single shot that we have to make a select on, we're never going to get started. Or at first you kind of start like that, where at first you're like really taking your time and say, oh, we're gonna go through it all, and oh my god, it's beautiful, and this one's even more beautiful, and we're gonna find the best possible one, and we're gonna take however long it takes, and then you do that, and then so you basically end up like eating 20% or 30% of the overall time you have on the selection process for like, the first 15% or 20% of your takes, of your shots, and then you wake up and you go, oh shoot, we only have this much time left to our schedule. Okay, from now on, we just look at the first 10 takes and find a select in there and move on. Go, 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 go. So those are kind of the ways that things evolve, and it's like everything. It's evolution of the process based on the technology. And
wow, that is a really, that's a really valuable insight to have. That is that is, I think that could, I hope that anybody listening to really appreciates that, that sort of perspective to it. That I think that people forget a lot of times that this is something that there is a limited amount of time to it. Gone are the days, I guess, of Stanley Kubrick in the editing booth for Eyes Wide Shut, taking however long he did, God rest his soul, and not even making it to the finish of it. That is.
We're not in the experimental days, in the 70s, or Coppola being.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Said or in the cutting room for Apocalypse Now, just kind of.
Right.
Yeah, making his art and not really knowing himself what he was doing, but figuring it out as he went. And even then, and the pressure was on for him. He that definitely was feeling it, but still, he was able to do that. And I can't think of any director today in this kind of A-list world who really would be able to work the same way. I think that's just a personal thing. I think Cameron is probably the closest to someone who
Yeah,
could
sure.
kind of basically tell everyone off and say, I'm going to do my thing and you'll get the film when you get it and go away. Because so far I'm batting 1,000%, and until I make a mistake and have a flop, you're going to shut up. And the studios will be like, well, he's kind of right, so I guess we'll shut up. But still, I think even he deals with a lot of studio pressures and timelines and deadlines. And I know, I remember having lunch with one of his editors on Avatar. That guy, I forget his name now, but he was Jason Tucker, who was the other editor on the Clone Wars, had actually been that editor's assistant, and he brought him in for lunch one day, and he was talking about some of what they went through and some of what Cameron had to go through in order to get approval for the trailer, just the trailer that he wanted to cut for Avatar. And I mean, that shows that, again, even someone at that level has to deal with a lot of things, which is it's just shifting dynamics and realities with time. And the industry was one thing in 1973, and it's another, today, and it'll be probably another in 30 years. When we were kind of stitching together the episodes that became the Clone Wars feature, I remember George having to go. This is crazy. George having to go through. We had to set a plan, quote unquote, in motion to get the trailer that we wanted out for the film, because there was this pressure coming to have other people come in and either cut a trailer or decide what, like sort of look over Dave's shoulder for this or that. And basically George had to say, kind of, he came in, I remember, on a Friday and was like, all right, guys, this is what we're going to do. You're going to do this and you're going to do that. And then that way we'll be able to have our cut and they won't be able to say anything. And, I mean, this is the guy who makes this stuff up and whose name is at the head of the film, and he has to come up with a way to cheat the system. So, in a world where sometimes before the script is even written, the studio has already had a press conference where they announce the release date of the film 2 years later, it shows you how many things are already set in stone that create these kind of deadlines and things that you have to work by, which then sometimes they can be good because it creates, you have to motivate yourself to say, okay, well, we have to get this done in X amount of time and then move on to this and move on to that. But it can also have an adverse effect where you sort of then have these things that can influence the process.
I was wondering, this is something. It's completely new territory that we're in now with Star Wars, and this is the first Star Wars story film. And so, how do you feel that this movie was able to capture the Star Wars spirit? Did it capture? And what do you feel like this movie says about the future of Star Wars films that we are going to be getting from Disney down the road? Obviously, they're working on the Han Solo film. They've already shot Episode 8, working on 9, having meetings about where they're going to go next. What do you think this film, Rogue One, sets as a precedent for all of that?
I feel like it does capture what Star Wars is about and the spirit of Star Wars, for lack of a better term, very well, for sure. I think that it's very authentic that way, and again, we've talked about a few things, Vader and Saw. I think it establishes also an amazing connective tissue for Star Wars and the Star Wars universe and the Star Wars story with a capital S as a whole. If anything, in terms of legacy, I think this film really is the first one as a film that says, look, there are no separate parts. There are no partitioned Star Wars stories. And let's be positive, you can actually recognize that. You can acknowledge this connection of all this material. And from there, you can work and create good stories that can still take place in whatever part of the timeline, whatever era you choose. If it's the original trilogy era, fine, but that still really make use of the entirety of Star Wars as a body and shows and respect and take into account the fact that it's all one universe with one history that has flowed from beginning towards its own end, whatever that is. And I think that it's shown that successfully. Now, I will say that I don't think, and again, that's just a personal opinion. I don't think that Rogue One stands. It's not a movie that it can stand on its own. It's really not a dig at it. You can watch it and have not seen any Star Wars movie before, and not see another one after that, and it's still a great film. But I do think that it doesn't stand as well as it can or must with other Star Wars films. I think that really the way that this film works best is as a complement to and a supplement to New Hope. I think that it's a wonderful film in its own, perhaps, and I really mean this with the best possible. I mean, to me, it's the best compliment that I can give it. It makes New Hope a better film, and I say that it's the best compliment I can give it because if you had asked me a year or two ago, do you think that there's a film, some film that doesn't exist already could make New Hope a better film? I would have said, not really, no, because New Hope is pretty damn perfect as it is. It's, how are you going to make it better? And to the extent that one did, Revenge of the Sith already did that. You feel so much more for Vader when you see New Hope directly after. I did that experiment with my son, and I kind of used him as my guinea pig and showed him the movies in order. And we literally went home after our crew screening, our premiere for Revenge of the Sith, and put in New Hope. So like 45 minutes after Revenge of the Sith ended, we started watching New Hope, and I didn't say anything during the movie. And afterwards, I said, "Okay, what do you think? What do you think about seeing Vader like that?" And knowing that at the time that we saw it, my generation, we didn't know all this stuff that you know now. And he said, "Well, I don't know how you felt, but I feel like I enjoyed more having seen it like this because I felt so much more for Vader. I still feel like he's the villain, he's the bad guy, and he's scary, and that works for me. But I feel sorry for him. I feel bad for him, and more than that, I understand why he's angry. Because even though I don't agree, he has a lot of good reasons to be angry because of what I just saw, and he had just seen him, getting burned alive an hour before. So, and somehow, and this doesn't take away anything from I love Revenge of the Sith, but I do think it's not so much that the movie itself is better. It's just where it takes place. It literally just, it is made like a Lego piece to connect to New Hope.
Right.
So in that sense, I would say that Rogue One, more so than Revenge of the Sith, complements New Hope even better. But again, it's not saying that Rogue One is better than Revenge of the Sith. It's just saying it's meant to work as something which it's conceived from the get-go as something which is going to give that much more power to New Hope. So I think that all of these things, when you look at that, it to me, and again, that's just to me, the message that if I was, and again, completely outside of who I am professionally and where I work, if I was as a fan, if I pretend for a second that I'm an executive, at Disney, involved with the making of Star Wars, or in any capacity, having some kind of decision-making power, I would say there's really something there that we need to tap into if we want to have a long-term relationship with the franchise and the storytelling of Star Wars, because again, it shows you the potential of the Star Wars universe, not just through the Skywalker saga, which eventually must end. You cannot keep doing trilogies about the Skywalkers. Eventually, at some point, you're going to run out of steam. It's inevitable, and I think everyone knows it. I don't think that anyone would argue the opposite. Whereas this story really shows you that connected directly or indirectly, and this is where you can start playing with where the dial finds its way. You can actually really tell stories, a lot of stories within the Star Wars universe, and yeah, I think that I hope that when this is kind of something that can be one of the cornerstones. It's not the first one. I think it's a work in progress. I think Dave did a lot of that through the Clone Wars at the time, towards the end of George's career, but then with Rebels and this is something that Dave did since day one with George. Dave has this kind of very patient way of working and saying, okay, I will carry out the vision that I'm here to carry out, but I will also, little by little, show you what I think can be done. And he has a really good way of never abusing someone's trust and someone's, the mission that he's given. He will carry it out, but when he sees that something even greater can be accomplished, he will find a way to put it in appropriately, little by little, until you really see that blossom, and until if you have any kind of integrity, you have no choice but to say, you're right. All right, keep going. That idea you had, just do more of that. And I think that Gareth Edwards, in his own way, again, I think that Rogue One, in my opinion, is the continuation of that. It's the next step, and so in that sense, I really hope that it is step one or step 2 or 3 of a process that will really allow us to. I think that these are the things these are the engines of Star Wars' long life. If it's going to have a long life, if it's going to reach, the Star Trek half-century mark and go beyond, I think it's through that. I think stories like the ones from the trilogies, they're the star. They're basically they're the core. They're what sort of initially creates that big bang that everything expands from. And I think Episode 7 is wonderful for that. Honestly, I think things happen the way they were meant to, and there are no what ifs in reality. There is only what there is. And I think that there could not. Rogue One is awesome. I don't like the comparisons because Rogue One is awesome because of what it is and where it's at and when it was made. I don't think Rogue One could have come out before Episode 7 came out. And I think Episode 7 really opens the door for Rogue One, for a film like Rogue One to come out. And then Rogue One in turn opens the door for, that's the actual expansion of the universe. It literally is the universe, the Star Wars universe expanding. And then from like the initial star, you can have a multitude of planets and galaxies and of stories and characters. So that's what I see. I know I love what the trilogies represent and what Episode 7 represents, for the fact that they are, every time a trilogy comes out, it's like a new star, around which then you can have all kinds of different worlds and life forms. And then Rogue One is that. It successfully says, look at what we can do. Look at the palette we have. And it says, now do it. And I think that what I would like to see is basically a real mature process of reflection, thought, and then creative ideas that put that into execution, because the sky's the limit. And there's so much. George's legacy, one of his legacies for Star Wars, is that, because again, Rogue One completely comes from everything that he tried to pass on and created, and the original trilogy and the prequels and Clone Wars. It's all in there. And so you really see in a movie like Rogue One the richness of the palette that he gave us. And literally, or it's more like a canvas. He created this canvas, and now we have an unlimited number of things we can paint on it. And so, that's really what I'm hoping for.
Just as asking as a fan to another fan, because this is sort of a question I'm obsessed with asking, but I would love to know your opinion, Nick. We have now we've had episode 7. Now we've had Rogue One, which is set between episode 3 and episode 4. And we know we got Han Solo coming up, and we all have our suspicions about what the next standalone is. So after all of this is done, what time period do you want to see them? Like if they came to you and said, what is your number one hope for where we go with in the time period for the next anthology movie, the Star Wars story movie, where would you place it?
I would place it sometime before episode 1, but not Old Republic style. I wouldn't go thousands of years before. And that's something that, eventually I'm also interested in. There's a number of reasons why. And actually, if you had asked me even like 10 years ago, I might have said, Old Republic time. Not necessarily in connection to any of the video games or whatnot, because I was never really into the Old Republic or the expanded universe material in the books and comic books, but more just in terms of the idea of like, something that's 5,000 years before, because it's so distant. But today, I don't know if it's just maturity or change. I would be more nuanced. I would be more interested in something that takes place anywhere 10 years to 40 years before episode 1. And not as like, this is the next era that I want to mine, for a trilogy or for, the next decade. If you just said, like you said, if you said, okay, the next anthology film, now, elevator pitch, boom, in terms of the time period, my first, what I would tell you for that film, just that film, would be, okay, it's set somewhere 10 to 40 years before episode 1. I think partly to tap into some of the same ideas that Old Republic stories try to tap into, but in my opinion, if you set it in a time period that's closer, you can do it cinematically, especially in a way that's, I think, more appropriate, more tasteful, and more correct, and services Star Wars and the story of whatever that film is better. I think that there is something really cool and kind of like Kid in a Candy Store about the reflex of saying, 5,000 years ago. But it's like I was saying, no matter how much you fall in love with the shot, with the idea, with the line, pause and ask yourself, does it service the story? If you think about it, beyond the initial coolness factor of saying, wow, 5,000 years ago, Old Republic, if you really want to put your George cap on, if you really want to be the next Gareth Edwards, you're setting yourself up for a lot more problems if you say Old Republic than if you say 40 to 50 years before episode 1. There's a lot of things which, just from a visual, from an aesthetic, and as an example, so we don't get bogged down on that. Like if you're either going to have to conceive a film which realistically will have to be completely different in terms of visuals, tone, aesthetic, style, from anything that is in any Star Wars film, that people are going to say, well, it's not really a Star Wars film, is it? Or you're going to box yourself into doing something which, in my opinion, is a mistake, which is you kind of have no choice. You're going to have ships, and that's my big problem with a lot of the Old Republic stuff I see. It's going to look and walk and talk like a current era Star Wars story, in which case it loses credibility as one that takes place 5,000 years ago, because you have ships that look like Star Destroyers and troopers that look like clone troopers and Jedi who look very much like Jedi today, And all of a sudden you're like, well, you're now telling me that this universe, which seems so much more complex and so much richer in a way than ours, had 5,000 years or 3,000 years with little to no evolution, culturally, intellectually, aesthetically, and all of a sudden, it becomes much more of a fan movie, a fan story, than a legitimate story. If you set it 40 to 50 years or 20 years before episode 1, all of a sudden you can tap into that what's cool about that idea, which is a world that's slightly more elegant, slightly more fantasy-like, a world that's slightly more medieval, where form is still a little more the priority than function, because there's been 1,000 years of peace and people have had time to just develop things just for the way they look as opposed to what they're supposed to do. But at the same time, you're able to craft a world which visually still looks like the ones that we know, and it makes sense why, because it's 40 to 50 years. It's World War II to the 80s, and I feel like it's a world where, just like Gareth Edwards and the team, that created Rogue One, you can completely, it's a world that's, the prequels are already different enough, and that's another gift of George's legacy, in terms of visual style and palette from the original trilogy. If you go back another 30 years or so, let's say, it's a world that's certainly going to be different enough that you can put in it its own characters, its own stories with their own morals. But at the same time, you have a lot of potential to build on that connective tissue. And again, I go back to servicing the story, servicing Star Wars, servicing George's legacy. In doing that, you can find things which would get me completely excited as a fan, but at the same time, it's not just about the fan service. It's not just for that little satisfaction of having a card at the beginning that says 5,000 years ago, and someone say, ooh. It's actually, you really are building on the connective tissue that George gave us with all the characters from the prequels, who actually then flow into the original trilogy, and show viewers how, like, there's this notion, of the Force and these things being one. Every event, it's like this giant butterfly. The Force is like the giant butterfly effect. Everything is connected, and in the end, you have these people acting at different times, who never meet, but who are all part of one chain of events that's going to lead to one final outcome. And we don't even know what that is, because now that we started with a new trilogy, we don't know where the Star Wars saga will end and what is the final outcome of the Journal of the Wills. That would be the place and time that I would be the most interested in seeing first. If you said, okay, you can write blank page, what would you like to see in the next anthology film? That would be it.
Cool.
What about you?
Oh, for me personally, at this point, speaking just for myself, my brain winds up going to one of two time periods, which is either between episode 1 and episode 2, focused like Rogue One, not on main characters, or between episode 6 and episode 7, because I would love to see just some of the world building, because 30 years is a pretty huge gap there, and I think that there are plenty of questions to answer in that time period. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I would love to see something done in any of the time periods that you guys mentioned. I think it would just be so much fun. I think, I'm a broken record, Kenobi. I really want to see that movie with Ewan McGregor in the desert. Apparently we're going to be getting some Kenobi on Rebels, so that's awesome. But,
yeah, I thought about you when I saw that trailer.
Yeah, but I'd still love to see a film with Ewan in it. So I don't know. I hope. I guess my big hope is just that they take a lot of time to think about, like what you were saying, Nick, just what service is Star Wars? Because at that point, and we're really at this point, especially once we finish the sequel trilogy, we're making the films for the people that are fans, because we're starting to fill in gaps, and so we want to do it well, and we want to make sure that we're honoring it and making it worthy of going to the theater and spending our money on it, and so and the action figures and all the other stuff. So I think, whatever they do, I want them to continue to do it well, and for me, Rogue One was exactly what I want from a new Star Wars movie, and I think everything that you said about Gareth Edwards and just the loving care that he had for the material, and I think it all just shines through, and I think it's one of the reasons people I've seen going back to the theater 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times to see this movie. So I think Star Wars is alive and well, not just with the Force Awakens did, but I think that Rogue One has really opened up a lot of new avenues, and to me, that is really, really exciting. I guess the last, I was just thinking about this, and I guess we would really, and John, we hate being remiss here, but
oh no, being remiss is our biggest.
It's
that's
like our biggest,
that's number one
fear.
on our list.
Yeah,
I was waiting.
Fear leads to remission, to being remiss, and that's so. But. And people always kind of ask, Star Wars fans, we love batting around where the film falls for you, and not in a mean way. It's just kind of that fun game we play. Lastly, where did Rogue One fall for you in the pantheon of Star Wars films?
Oh man, that's a tough one.
Well, I mean, we get paid to ask the big questions here, so.
Okay, well, first let me ask you, am I allowed ties?
Sure, yeah.
Absolutely. Ties are allowed in all different sorts of events, so ties are completely allowed here.
Okay, so ties do not make us remiss. The cool thing about Rogue One is, for the longest time, Empire and Jedi were my favorite Star Wars films, tied together. Empire for all the reasons that, would make it a lot of Star Wars fans' favorite Star Wars film, and Jedi because I think I was the perfect age when I saw it. I was 12, and I really think it's the magical age for boys to sort of, I don't know, establish a lifetime connection with films. And I love New Hope, but New Hope was knocked down. I mean, for the longest time, it was my third favorite because that's all we had. And then eventually we started getting more Star Wars films, and it got knocked down, not because I didn't like it. I loved it. There's no Star Wars film of the 7+1 now that I don't like. It just got knocked down because there were some that I loved more. But the cool thing about Rogue One is that it did what I think it's supposed to do. It made me love New Hope more. And it brought New Hope back as almost definitely in the top 3. And depending on my mood, depending on why I'm thinking, on loving a Star Wars movie the most, even possibly made it my favorite Star Wars movie. Because it reminded me of all the things that are magical and important and amazing in New Hope. So, in a way, this is going to sound like I'm making the movie a disservice, but I really don't mean it like it, because it is what did that. By association, and that's really what I don't want to have it be misinterpreted. Like, I don't mean that in a bad way at all, but by association, it makes it either my favorite, or you could say my second favorite, sort of like side by side with New Hope. It definitely comes in that top, well, you could say the top 2, because they're ties, right? So there are ties. So going back and forth, it's either Empire and Jedi, and then New Hope and Rogue One, or New Hope, Rogue One, and Empire and Jedi. Probably at the current moment. That may change the next time I go on a rewatch of the entire original trilogy and rewatch Empire and Jedi. Currently, it would probably be New Hope and Rogue One tied, and then Empire and Jedi tied for number 2, at a very close number 2, neck and neck.
That's high praise, man. That's really cool.
I think I texted Matthew not long after seeing it for the first time, and I told you, Matt, I certainly don't want to speak for George, but again, like whatever part of him I took in the 7 years that I worked directly with him, when I was watching the film for the first time, I could feel that tiny little George particle I have floating in me, grinning from ear to ear. And that wasn't Nick, the Star Wars fan. It was having sat and listened to George talk about his taste and having learned what matters to him in Star Wars and what he cares about, and the ways that he was hurt at times by things and people that didn't do with Star Wars what he felt was right for Star Wars. Watching the film, I was like, I can literally feel George sitting next to me and being almost, it's a role reversal, him being the happy 7-year-old watching this film being like, and this guy got it. And so in that sense, yeah, I mean, I think it's the highest praise, and I'm not surprised, then when I found out and Greg told me that George had called Gareth Edwards and had spent like a half hour with him on the phone, telling him exactly everything that it meant for him, that he had done the movie the way he did. I was like, yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because in every way, the way this movie is shot, the way it's edited, the way it's written, it feels like somebody who went to school with George Lucas, and the way that George, it feels like the kind of movie that George would like to watch. And I can't describe it any better than that. So I think from that standpoint, it really is very deserving. And again, like the only, it's not a fault. The only thing is that I think it's not a shortcoming, is that it elevates itself to that level, but it needs New Hope to really be at that highest level. If you look at it in a vacuum, only by itself, it doesn't have that high of a payoff. But connected to New Hope, then it really elevates itself very, very high.
I think I completely agree with you, and I don't think that's one of those things with this type of Star Wars film. That is kind of the point of it. It is meant to connect, and so with that being its MO, that's okay. That you feel like you have to have A New Hope with that, and I think that's they just did a wonderful job, like you said, of making it feel like you had to go home. Like I had so many friends say, I got home, it was really late from seeing it Thursday night, and I had to pop in. It didn't matter if it was going to be tired the next day, but I had to watch A New Hope. And I think that's the highest compliment. I think Gareth Edwards hearing that from all the fans, that had to feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really do think that this is also part of, it's almost like the final punctuation, or the first one, I'm not sure, of his love letter to George, through this film. It's basically a film that tells you, dude, go home and put Star Wars on right now.
Yes. Well, Nick,
Yeah.
is there any, before we let you go, and thank you so much for sharing with us your expertise as a filmmaker and an editor at ILM, and of course just a huge Star Wars fan, and somebody who worked so closely with the maker and Dave Filoni as well. Is there anywhere online where people can contact you and talk to you about Star Wars and hit you up with some questions or anything like that?
Sure. I mean, I'd say Facebook is probably the easiest, and you can find me, under my name. I have a Facebook account. I'm not an avid Facebook user, but I'm on it pretty regularly. So if you want to find me on there, that's totally cool. I would say just send me a message, and if you you want to friend me, just let me know who you are and why, and I'll gladly open the door. And I thank you guys for having me, for allowing me to share a little bit of. I'm always, I feel like, again, it's just part of the legacy. Any chance I get to spread George's word and his ideas and what I feel like he imparted on me, on us, it's a great honor for me, and also just to be able to hang out with two other Star Wars geeks. And like I said, I listen to you guys every week, your companions and friends, in my day-to-day life. So it's great to be able to partake and participate in the conversation every now and then. It's awesome.
No, thank you so much. The highest compliment to us is that you think we're worth listening to.
Yeah.
I mean that sincerely too. That's not just blowing smoke. That is honestly, sitting here and talking with you is, and I know I'm speaking for Matt too in this circumstance, a terrific honor, because you do have those insights that we don't. That I feel coming out of a conversation like this, I feel like I understand things better, and if anything. And I don't know what this might be worth or not, but, hearing the context of, what goes into, making a movie like Rogue One, or participating in, knowing what, an effects bid is versus the final shot total or something like that, actually makes me appreciate and enjoy a movie like Rogue One even more, and winds up elevating my opinion of it, because I understand how much work goes into it, and so there's a whole other aspect to the whole thing. So thank you so much, and I know that everybody else who's listening right now feels the same way. I feel confident in that statement. So we really do appreciate it.
Well, likewise. I mean, like I said, the appreciation is mutual and equal. I think it's a work of love, and it starts with fandom. When I was on the Clone Wars, I always said the amount of work, the amount of details, the amount of people, the amount of time, the amount of relentless energy that it takes to create something of that magnitude, and that is from my small part of it. For someone like Dave, I cannot even imagine. He's going on 12 years of doing what he's doing, and just as tirelessly and as energetically and with as much passion as he started. You cannot, and that starts with George. It's the same for a guy like that, and to any fan who listens, I will tell you, with everything that is human, right? No one is a god. No one is, everyone is human, but it starts with love and passion, and from George all the way down to every production assistant. There was a PA, who's a good friend of mine now, who I helped. She was working at the Starbucks next to ILM, and I helped her get hired as a PA. And her first show, as random luck would have it, was The Force Awakens, and then she moved on to Rogue One, and now she's actually going to be on the Han Solo film. And again, it's kind of, it just worked itself out like that. And she, from Mary all the way up to George, it's a work of passion. She is so in love with Star Wars in a way that is raw fandom, and also now she's 500% professionally dedicated to her job. But it works from that place. It starts from there, and it doesn't get to be what it is without being that first, and without remaining that. You cannot sustain the amount of energy. Trust me on that. You cannot sustain the amount of what it'll take out of you. The only way you can give what you need to give is if you have that inside of you, because that passion is just limitless. So that's what will provide the fire you need to just keep on giving what you need to give. Film like Episode 7 is a film that's planned. It's a part of a plan. A film like Rogue One is felt. Neither is diminished or elevated above or below the other for that. But I feel like, you're talking about the fans, and I do feel like one thing I hope that this can really help everyone believe in and understand and apply, both on the fan side and professionals, in charge of Star Wars, is the fact that it is really important, legitimate, and possible to let passion speak and create great Star Wars. Star Trek did it. Some of the best, if not the best, Star Trek stories, from the beginning of Star Trek all the way to the end of Star Trek on TV so far, came from people who at first were just fans and loved Star Trek and wanted to tell the story, and applied themselves 1,000% professionally to do it to the best of their abilities once they got the shot. But it started with their love of it. And I feel like that's probably the message that I would like above all to have just float out there, is the fact that fandom and love and passion really is in all of the essential, the most important creators of these big ideas. It's important for fans to know that, to believe that, to never doubt it, because it's completely true. And it's important for the other people, the people in charge of making these massive behemoths, to remember that these ideas, the best ideas within these big franchises, it's a business, absolutely. We need to ally the practical, the plan to the creative, absolutely, because that's the only way it'll continue to exist. But then you need to put faith into the passion and the love, because out of that will come the best ideas. I really believe that.
Amen. Well, thank you, Nic, for your time, and thank you so much for being on the show, for being such a wonderful listener to us and and supporting us through this too. And we really appreciate it. Just thank you for your friendship. It's been a fantastic friendship over the last couple of years, and I just can't wait to continue
Likewise.
to have amazing conversations with you here on the show and off the show. And so yeah, thank you so much for spending your evening with us talking about Rogue One and just Star Wars in general.
It's my pleasure, guys. Anytime. And John, you got to tell Mike Schindler at some point, he and I will have to have a talk about some of his film taste.
You know what? You are welcome at any point to come on to Great Shot Kid, because I'll tell you what, I drink more heavily because of my friendship with Mike Schindler. I would love anybody else to come on and talk to him.
I'll believe that. I believe that. And and I respect him equally. I mean, Mike clearly, just like you guys, is just as devoted, dedicated, intelligent in his thinking, which makes sometimes his choice in film even more infuriating. I'm like, what did you just say? You did not just say what you said. I did not just hear that.
Nic, it is as if you're living in my soul right now. You understand me. Oh, gosh, I love that.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you so much, Nic, and we'll look forward to having you back soon.
Anytime, guys.
That was a lot of fun. Nick's such a great guy, man. I love him.
Yeah, he
do.
really
and
is.
The fact that he name-checked Schindler at the end.
Oh, fantastic.
That is one of the happiest moments of 2017 so far for me.
I mean, it's going to be hard for you to top that.
Yeah,
I want to hear them get into it, because, like, I love Mike too, but his fantastical love for teen rom-coms.
No. That's not even the worst of it. The fact that the fact that he'll sidle up and he'll defend something like Batman Forever.
Well, there you go.
That's mind blowing.
There you go. Oh gosh.
Anyway.
I hope everyone has enjoyed us kind of taking a completely different look at Rogue One from, I think, pretty much any podcast that's been out there. And it's for us to be able to bring this to you has been just as much a joy as I hope that all the listeners have had, John. And if this is the start for us on aggressive negotiations for 2017, we've got great things in store. We've got some amazing things to talk about coming up. I mean, I You haven't seen it, but I'll just say Rebels had its first episodes of 2017, and we got so much to talk about there. We're going to be talking more Rogue One and continuing to bring you some completely esoteric discussions of things. I think we even have a discussion, John, in the works of the Force itself in relation to Rogue One, the original trilogy, and the prequels. So, I mean, it's going to be a fantastic year.
It is, Matt, and I'm really looking forward to it. And if anybody's really looking forward to something, where can they reach you online so that they can tell you what they're looking forward to?
Hit me up on Twitter, MattRushing02. You can also find me on Instagram, MRushing. Of course, I'm on the Trek FM network with The Orb, with Chris Jones, talking about Deep Space Nine, as well as the General Geek Show, the 602 Club. Check both of those out. And, of course, you can also find Star Wars, the 602 Club collection. All of those are available on iTunes. And brand new this year, started a new podcast here on the Nerd Party with my good friend Drea Kaufman. And we are walking through every single chapter of Harry Potter. And that podcast is called Owl Post. I hope everybody will check it out. So please go over, find it on iTunes. Listen to it, give it a review. Let us know what you're thinking over, of course, on our Facebook group, facebook.com/The Nerd Party. And, of course, you can find us on thenerdparty.com. We're also online at Join Nerd Party on Twitter. And, of course, we have the Jedi Masters on Twitter as well. John, goodness, you've got so much going on. So if somebody wants to catch up with you on all the other podcasts you're doing, or just shoot you off a message on Twitter, where can they find you?
Oh, just look for Castle Junkie on your social network of choice. That's where I'll be. And you can also find me co-hosting with the aforementioned Mike Schindler on Great Shot Kid right here on the Nerd Party Network, where we look at the creators of the Star Wars galaxy. And likewise, we look at the creators of the Star Trek galaxy over on Trek.fm for Stage 9. And you can find me co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig, where we get into all kind of zany goodness. But, Matt, I think that people should also spend the time to go ahead and give Aggressive Negotiations a review over on iTunes. Whatever you think of us, we think we're a pretty good show. So if you want to go ahead and let iTunes know that we're a pretty good show, that would be great. It will help people discover this show and help them, join the Aggressive Negotiations.
And John, I love that you bring that up, because we wanted to say a special thank you to somebody who has just recently given us a brand new review on iTunes, and it's PDX Harvey, and they say this is a bomb bad podcast. Thanks, gentlemen. I really dig the insights and the take on the Star Wars universe, and both of you keep up the great work. And to that we say, ooh, thank you so much. We just love that review.
Miss, I think that's so great. Thank you so much.
Oh, John, and on that note, I think there's only one thing left to say. I think it's time to close negotiations.
Matt, negotiations are closed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.